You're listening to the Fusion Patrol Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Fusion Patrol. I'm Eugene.
And I'm Simon.
And we're talking tonight about the final episode of Sapphire Steel. Simon, welcome back to the show. Glad you could join us again.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And you may have noticed Ben is not chipped in here with us right now. He is. We're having a little bit of a glitch getting him lined up to talk with us tonight, but we're hoping to have him in a little bit later on the show. This is an interesting episode of Sapphire Steel for a number of reasons. This is I'm not sure whether this is a fan favorite or a fan disfavorite, but it certainly is a milestone episode in the series. Not just because it's the last one they made, but because of events in the course of the story. So I'll just start right off. We'll start with Simon. What did you think of this episode overall?
Well, I'll apologise in advance if I spend most of the podcast going, so what was going on there then? It's one of the things about knowing that it's the last story, and you know a little bit about the history when you're coming new to something that was broadcast 30 years ago and is on DVD, and you know that it's where it all finishes. There are obviously a lot of unanswered questions in Sapphire Steel, added to which, of course, was the fact that you told me that this was event television, so I had quite a weight of expectations coming to it. And in a sense, it seemed there were three stages to it. The first couple of episodes felt, although there was a setup, felt very much like the kind of atmospheric, weird, very claustrophobic Sapphire Steel stories in previous adventures. Then episode 3 is a little bit different because there's a new character suddenly introduced at this point, and then at the end of that there's also a revelation. Then of course episode 4, where it all gets wrapped up. And I think probably I'm not going to be able to avoid talking about this with spoilers in it. So
right.
If you haven't heard the show yet, I think we should probably say at the end of this story, there's an event which, if you know about it in advance, may spoil your enjoyment of this adventure.
Yeah, stop the recording right now. Find a copy of Sapphire Steel. Listen to it. Otherwise, it's unavoidable that you will know something about the ending of this show. I think that's a safe.
Also, it's a fantastic show, so you'll thank us for it if you haven't seen it yet. It's and I must say I'm very pleased to have been introduced to this show by the Fusion Patrol podcast.
1 out of 4. Woohoo!
Yeah.
Anyway. So I think you're right. I think the first couple of episodes were very. Actually, I thought the first couple of episodes were very reminiscent of the earlier episodes of Sapphire Steel, because of course they're going into this and they're being presented with the usual kinds of things: images, people traveling out in the wrong time, trapped at a gas station that is empty. You know, all the people have disappeared. The plates of food are left on the table, kind of a Marie Celeste, and then in the present day. And then you have these people who've come in from the 1940s, and they don't know why they're there. And so Sapphire Steel are looking for the trigger. They're looking for, what's going on. Time is kind of standing still. It's very standard setup for Sapphire Steel, if you want to call it Sapphire Steel a standard program. In fact, in a way, in the first 2 episodes, I kind of got the feeling that says, maybe this is why Sapphire and Steel has to come to an end. Because even though we haven't quite seen this exact situation before, it's getting repetitive. This is what they do every time. Kind of. And I could see, this does not have the legs that, say, Doctor Who does, where they can just go anywhere and any time.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you on 3 counts there. I think. Okay. Firstly, I guess it's something that was the nature of the show. Whether it needed to be the nature of the show, I'm not sure. But the show was always 1980, and it always seemed to be set on the same planet and in the same country. And there seemed to me to be within the show, no particular reason why that was the case. Obviously, from the point of view of the production, it was a conscious choice about what they wanted to focus on. But I thought maybe there was something to explore further there. Secondly, I thought what Adventure 5 showed was that it could go in a different direction. That it was interesting to see what different writers did with the show, and the fact that Peter Hammond himself gave that serial to other writers because he had run out of things to do with it. I mean, in a way that backs up your point. His stories have a certain style, and he maybe started to run out of ideas, or at least was finding it difficult to produce new ideas at the rate needed. But bringing the new writers in, I thought, was really interesting, because the characters of Sapphire and Steel worked. The whole time concept was interesting. The show felt very different, but it did not work for me.
Fair enough.
I enjoyed it. Thirdly, I have to say, the first couple of episodes of this serial I thought were fantastic. I know it was familiar in a way, but they just seemed to heighten and do what had come before in all of the previous adventures even better. And I think it worked because not only did you have typical ultra cryptic Sapphire and Steel. They turn up, they don't give away very much. We still don't know who the hell they are, or what they are, or who sent them, or any of these things. We're still hoping, maybe expecting to find out about. Mm-hmm. They're more than usually uncertain about what's going on. There's a sinister edge to the fact that they're concerned about the situation. It's not a regular assignment. And then you have these two characters turning up from 1948 who are very tight-lipped. So you have a situation where no one is giving away anything at all. And of course, it's very typical of Sapphire and Steel. It's all about keeping you as the audience guessing. But it seemed like the show had got quite a confidence to do that. So everything is a mystery. You know nothing about any of these people, and the show just lives on it. The atmosphere carries it, I think.
That's all right. That's all fair enough. The two people that have come from 1948 are, as you say, tight-lipped. They're not hysterical, as you might think. They are reasonably rational, I guess would be the way to put it. Because, for example, the woman doesn't want to have any food, and she just wants water. I'll just have a glass of water. Her justification was, look over there at this table. There were people here. The food's not eaten. I'm not touching any of that food. And that's a very composed attitude for somebody who's just been launched, 32 years or so through time. So, yeah, there is something odd about the people, and yet at the same time, it's played reasonably convincingly. At least when I first saw it, I truly didn't know that these people weren't necessarily what they said they were. Let's put it that way.
It's an odd reaction,
Yes.
but it's not necessarily inexplicable.
Right.
And that gives the dramatic tension, you think. And also, I mean, I think the performances from both of these actors, Edward D'Souza and Johanna Kirby, was fantastic. They gave a very contained performance, which really conveyed. I mean, it reminded me enormously of Brief Encounter, and I was thinking of Trevor Howard and Celia Johnson meeting at a station, and instead of a railway station, you've got a filling station here. But you definitely got a sense, even before it was revealed that they were running away together, that they were not married to one another, you got a sense of that coming across from it, and the different standards of 1948. And the very interesting dialogue where the woman, whose name we, of course, never learn, is saying, well, you don't have to tell them anything. Don't tell them anything. That she's being quite secretive, but overtly secretive, challenging their authority.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely not... It's when you watch it, you don't think, no, that's something really definitely positively wrong. You think, well, that's a different reaction. It's certainly different from what I would have if I were lurched forward, but at the same time, it's not inexcusable. It's within the realm of saying, all right, I can, under their circumstances, I can kind of see that. So, well, we forgot to mention, no, forgot maybe the wrong word, but that Silver is also in this. David Collins is back doing his part as Silver, the technician, and he is in this episode throughout the entire time. He starts off there even before Sapphire and Steel arrive, which is, as they point out, unusual. And I like the character of Silver. I think he adds a lot to the little dynamic between Sapphire and Steel. You kind of feel like you're going to get more out of them rubbing against Silver.
I wondered, in terms of Silver's role in this episode, whether you had any thoughts on both what he's doing there in terms of the plot and in terms of the dramatic purpose, if you like, because to me there's some sense. I mean, I've talked a bit about the way in which there's such a lot of cryptic withholding of information. It's mysterious. Silver in there, he's a little bit more extrovert, and he's a little bit more humorous, and he lightens it a bit. But I don't. Well, I suppose none of them know why they're there at the start of the episode, and the fact that Silver appears to be worried when he's such a sort of happy-go-lucky kind of character is perhaps a way of heightening the impact when you realise just how concerned they are. But towards the end of the episode, when we find out what has actually been going on, do we know why Silver was brought there at all?
No clue. In fact, it seems to be the flaw in the plan. If Silver hadn't been there, I think the plan would have run smoother for the villains, if you will. I think we'd go out of the way and say that the villains actually arranged for Sapphire Steel and Silver to be there, but they don't actually appear to be interested in Silver, is really the bottom line of it. And so why throw him into the mix? I don't know. I really don't know.
In amongst all the other questions about Sapphire and Steel, maybe it's not a very big one. And I mean, I agree with you. I think he added to the episode dramatically and
well, he was critical for balance. Sapphire and Steel to fight back. I mean, yes. His ability to replicate things and equipment. If they hadn't had that, they'd have been completely stuck. And Silver is what gave them a chance to escape the trap And I'll tell you, I guess, that if, for example, I don't know about the British DVDs because I know they're different, but the American DVDs give names for the episodes. They were never names on the episodes, but they call them. They have various names. Sometimes this one's called The Service Station, but on the DVDs it's quite clear it's The Trap. Now, this story is a trap, and why Silver's in it is never made remotely clear.
Well, what we're asking the questions about the plot here. Well, I mean, as you say, we discovered that it's a trap, and that the characters who, besides Sapphire, Silver, and Steel, the characters who are there, at least apart from the woman, are sent from a higher authority.
Yes,
another mystery.
Yeah.
And
an illogical one too, but we can get to that later.
Illogical in the sense of...
Illogical in the sense that these other people are, quote-unquote, beings like us, like Sapphire and Steel and Silver. They work that out. They're like us. And we think they work for a higher authority. And then in the next sentence, we're told that they are transient beings and that they have a limitation. They can only travel backwards in time, which sounds like they're less powerful than Sapphire and Steel. Although I guess we have no proof that Sapphire and Steel can travel either forward or backward in time. But that part didn't make any sense. You know, at one point, they're our equal in our match, and then another point, well, they're only our equal in as much as they need some technological assistance to do things that we believe Sapphire and Steel can do without it. So that one didn't quite ring true.
But they may have the ability to do things that goes above and beyond Sapphire and Steel's abilities in other respects.
Right. We don't really see that.
Because one thing I'm wondering about is at the start of the story, when we're introduced to the man and the woman in the cafe, Steel asks Sapphire about them, and she says that she knows a little bit about their history. For example, she knows, presumably somehow telepathically, that they're both married, she says, though not to each other. And she knows that they come from 1948.
And that they're human.
She's used the powers that we've come to rely on to verify that they are authentic. And then, of course, they're not authentic.
All right.
So is there any clue there as to how they've managed to deceive Sapphire in that respect, or to pass as...
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the part about being human, maybe that one's passable, because I get the impression that of all things that Sapphire and Steel are, I think they're humans. The comment in the fifth adventure about are you aliens, and Steel's very clear about that, in an extraterrestrial sense. To me, that means I'm a human born somewhere else.
Yeah.
An alien.
But the one thing that always there seems to be certainty about is whenever there's an artifact or something, Sapphire is able to tell when it comes from.
Right.
And these people, they've come from 1948.
Well, they have come from 1948. I mean, so the analysis of their clothes and the things that they carry and that's all correct. They did indeed come from 1948. They mentioned that the transient beings are all stationed at points in history. So part of it is an assessment of some of the artifacts, but there's also the question of their being married. So, right. In retrospect, are we? I'm just wondering about this, but are we to take it that these transients were actually married? Maybe, with kids or a cat, 2 up, 2 down. They have a job in an office, work 9 to 5. Is that what they do? I don't know. It may very well be that they are, but nonetheless, they probably are clouding what Sapphire can read. But whether or not Sapphire could cloud somebody else from reading her, we don't know. So, it's interesting. And I'm at the end of the episode, I'm unclear as to whether or not the woman is one of them or not. In the final, if I were, somebody said, okay, you have to decide, I'd say yes, she was. But I'm about 55% certain that that she was.
That's blown my hope of getting an answer to my next question there.
Okay.
Because then there's the question of at the point at which the other three, the men, transform, Sapphire and Steel instantly know. At that point, suddenly they know. So if it's about clouding them or whatever it is, then their power to hide it or their desire to hide it is gone, and suddenly they can be seen. But they can't tell. If the woman is one of them, Sapphire and Steel can't detect it at that point. And then of course there's this slightly odd scene where, surprising scene where Silver rips open the woman's blouse and discovers these implants. Mm-hmm. This sounds worse when I'm describing it than you have actually seen it.
2 implants, I might add, too.
Yes,
on her chest. It is, you think she? I thought when they did that, she's talking. She decides she's going to be friendly with him and try to help them, and hey, he's trying to hurt you and trap you, and I'm just telling you this, and then suddenly there's little noises, and it's she starts repeating things, and you go, well, she's a robot. She's obviously a robot, and that's the point where Silver starts tearing off her blouse, and there are these implants. I guess I would have used alligator clips, I think is what they were. And he pulls them off her, and now it seems like she's under their mind control. Because once free of that, now she can tell them a different story. But if indeed she's one of them, that's all just an act. And she's still keeping them from seeing the truth. And I'd like to think that that's the case, because if it isn't, then it just doesn't make sense. Then it's just kind of bad plotting.
I think it's a double bluff.
So they've kept her basically an ace in the hole. We'll reveal ourselves, and if in the end you beat us, well, we've still got her, and she's got your sympathy now, because they're trying to save her life and get her away from these people. Except for Silver at one point, who decides he wants to abandon her and escape on his own when he realizes the trouble, which I thought was interesting. Sapphire and Steel were really kind of felt they had an obligation to save her life, but Silver didn't.
Yeah, given the way that on occasions Steel, for example, has behaved in the past, it's interesting that he feels that obligation so strongly. Though I suppose the question here is not about sacrificing people in order to keep time from
a worse thing happening, right?
Yeah, from a sort of catastrophe at that level. It's actually about self-preservation, in which case less noble still. Perhaps you could put it that way.
I suppose, yeah. And he shows himself to be, as does Sapphire, they show themselves to be, quote-unquote, the heroes. Because even in face of a very real, credible threat, they're going to still save the woman. So we didn't really talk about the plot much of this story, and there's kind of a reason for it. And I don't mean to be dismissive of the plot. They have to keep you busy for 4 episodes. And this is a 4-episode one, so this makes this the shortest, or equally the shortest, of all the stories. But things happen. It's just like in the other episodes. They arrive at a place, there's a mystery. There's things going wrong with time. They don't make sense. phones ring when they can't possibly ring, and when you pick them up, it's the talking clock, or time is standing still, but every once in a while it lurches forward. First 10 minutes, then 20 minutes, and 40 minutes. And, of course, you have the mystery of the people, why they're there, why Johnny Jack, with all his children on his back, shows up later on from the 60s, and what precipitated that, why they see kind of ghosts. All that stuff, in the end, doesn't matter, because it's kind of a diversionary tactic. It's meant to have Sapphire and Steel investigating it, or it appears to be that's what it's meant to do, but it doesn't. It ultimately doesn't go anywhere, because once we reveal that this is a trap, it becomes a different story. And I thought that was an interesting choice of putting it together. It's like they could have done this in 2 episodes if they had just simply, because the key here is getting Sapphire and Steel to the service station, which they do in Scene 1, Episode 1. So I'm not sure why. I mean, did you get any feel for why they were doing all the diversionary tactics, or they were delaying before they tried to spring the trap? I don't quite get that.
Well, the mystery itself is what draws that's what draws them into the trap. I mean, first of all, there's the plot purpose to this, and there's the dramatic purpose to this. And the plot purpose, the different characters who are arriving are coming from. We understand they're coming from the past. Somehow they're moving forward in time, even though we know that they're not normally able to do that. Their purpose is to draw Sapphire and Steel into a place where they can trick them, and that's how they're going to spring the trap. They need to do that without Sapphire and Steel cottoning onto what's going on. Hence, possibly the running around and all of this scenario. I guess. I mean, as you're watching it, you don't think of it in those terms, because obviously until the reveal, you don't actually understand what's going on anyway.
Well, I think it's as safe as true with the audience and Sapphire and Steel. They are running along, looking and being drawn into a mystery, and then suddenly they realize the mystery is, well, irrelevant, really.
From a dramatic point of view, it's kind of paring down the whole Sapphire and Steel thing to its
I guess it's giving us our
elements. There's the sinister things like hearing the talking clock repeating the same second of time over and over again, or the radio repeating the same second of time. It's an echo of what we've had all the way through the series, of the way in which you can generate fear and horror through very simple, repetitive sounds. It's the basic and the mundane things that PJ Hammond just seems to be able to make scary. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, and it's also, I mean, in a way, that's kind of like what you see in the revived Doctor Who stories that Stephen Moffat writes, where statues are scary and cracks in the wall are scary. But the difference here is how theatrical it all is. I mean, sitting looking at it struck me, and way back when you discussed the first episode, and you had a fascinating discussion in that podcast about the particulars of the specials that had been used in it. But it's all very, very simple,
mm-hmm.
and you can and
it could be a stage play.
Almost. It could be a stage play. I mean, because you're on a confined set there, it's studio based. There'd be very little changes necessary, and it's very, very dialogue heavy. And what makes it, apart from the writing, which is brilliant, the performances. And David McCallum and Joanna Lumley are utterly brilliant. and I think this story just reinforces that. They make Sapphire and Steel, and as I've said, I think the Edward D'Souza, in particular, Johanna Kirby as the woman, gave fabulous performances in this. It's a great piece of theatre, really, and it makes the plot seem almost secondary because you're so absorbed in this repeated moment.
I think there's no doubt that Sapphire and Steel, fatuous though this may sound on the face of it, I mean, Sapphire and Steel make these stories. David McCallum and Joanna Lumley, their character, their performance makes the story. The atmosphere and whatnot that is built up around them is great, and not to detract from that, but you are watching these stories to watch those two people, even though they're the name of the series. That's not necessarily true. I mean, you may be watching a story where the heroes, where the story is more important than the hero that you have in place, and the reverse is true here. It is Sapphire and Steel that make this story, all of the stories, what they are. I don't think Sapphire and Steel would be the same without Joanna Lumley and David McCallum. I think there are certain aspects to them that are not repeatable. Some characters you can just swap out another actor. Hamlet, for example. It is the just any old good actor can play that part. It's a great part. It's written out, and a competent actor, preferably a great actor, can take that role. I don't know about Sapphire and Steel. And I think the jury's out on that one. I don't think that they could recast that and it would be the same. In particular, David McCallum. That's not to slight Joanna Lumley, but in particular, I think there's this. He is playing it in a picture perfect way, and I'd have trouble with somebody else playing that part.
I'm not going to pick a favourite, but I think.
Oh, Joanna Lumley's my favourite of the two, but because she's a lot prettier.
Okay, that may be slightly different,
but that's probably a different reason. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just think the role of the character of Sapphire is a little more generic than Steel, and I say that because Steel has this sort of, he's a tough guy, but frankly he's a little man. And he's got long hair, and he's too young for the part that he plays. And if you deviated from that, and he's not an authoritative man. I mean, as an actor, every role I've ever seen him in, he's second fiddle. He's soft, and to have him play Steel as this hard character, it comes off a little more alien than it does to have Sapphire play a sort of haughty, straight-backed, well-postured, sophisticated, attractive woman.
On the UK DVDs, there is a half-hour documentary, which I believe may not be on the US DVD. Yes, but it's interesting because in that there's a discussion about how much David McCallum not only liked the part when he first read the scripts, but also cared about it when they were making the show, and how much he put into working late into the night with the show's producer Sean O'Riordan in making the bits work that they felt were not happening. So undoubtedly, that character has been. It's not only Dave McCallum's portrayal of it, he's shaped the character quite actively. Mm. But I mean, I think, without getting into the whole James Bond question, I couldn't watch this show if Roger Moore were playing that part. And I think the issue for me is, like we were talking about, it's a theatrical show. It's like it could be on stage, and you need great actors in those in those roles, and that's what make it. We've talked about, you've talked about in previous episodes the unsympathetic aspects, which really are predominant in both the characters of Sapphire and Steel. It's hard to make such cruel characters sympathetic and interesting.
Yes,
but they do, and yet without compromising on the characters.
And I will just add here to the point that it is a great shame in my book that they don't make more theatrical TV shows. I'm not saying it's film stage plays, but I mean the evolution of television production has just taken us, I guess, logically away from it, because early television is radio with pictures. And if you watch an old TV show, you can just turn the picture off and you don't need it. And they have evolved over time with the advances in special effects, the advances in editing, frankly, the familiarity of people watching television. They've grown up watching television. They have that shared paradigm communication with television, with the director, with the editor, and they have been able to evolve this, and at the expense of programs like this, really.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was exactly one of the things that I wanted to ask. Would a TV show like that get made today? Well, no, I don't think it would. And I do agree with you, and there has been an evolution away from it, and it is partly to do with what's possible now. So if you imagine Sapphire and Steel now with the special effects of today, all the CGI and stuff, would that add to the show to have today's effects?
They certainly would have had a lot more junk going on, if you will. I mean, the special effects are largely eye candy, and you want to put the eye candy in. And so I'm not saying I agree that they should, but I don't think they would. I mean, look at the new Doctor Who. I love the new Doctor Who, but it bears very little stylistic resemblance to the original, and I have no problem with the original.
I certainly don't want to take away from shows that are made today. It's just, it seems like we've lost something in the diversity of this, because there's a place for effects that are constrained. There's an authenticity to some of the stuff that's done in this, and yet, although you can trace the lineage, it's an evolution through radio and theatre. It's a visual show. This couldn't be done on radio, and it's also a show where the performances are television performances, and it's serialised, it's episodic. It's not something that you could get in a theatre either.
Yeah.
But it is very different from what you would get today. You don't get shows that are so dialogue heavy. You don't get shows that are edited in this way. And this is probably more of a fashion or a cultural thing than anything to do with the way in which technology has shaped the development of television. But would we get a show that was so uncompromising about refusing all the questions we've got about Sapphire and Steel, all the things we hoped would be answered in this and thankfully weren't? Would a show that just refused to explain any of its premise get made?
No, I don't think so, and I do think that's partially
backstory.
I do think that's partially cultural, because this will be a topic of a future Fusion Patrol. But I'll throw it out here as an example. Space 1999, which is a British program, but was made with an eye towards syndication to the United States. The casting of the main characters was specifically to appeal to a U.S. audience. There are many stories in Space 1999 that in the first year, and it's very important to make that distinction, that don't answer all the questions. Space is a big mystery, and we're just passing through it, and we have enough time to kind of touch on it, do everything we can to survive to get past it, but we don't answer all the questions. And at the time that Space 1999 aired, particularly in the United States. I really don't know what the reaction was in Britain. People would go, well, that was just a lousy plot. That didn't make any sense. They basically threw out the production crew and got a new production crew managed by an American, and they produced horrible tripe for the second season. But as an adult, when I go back, and I liked both seasons because I was a kid, but as an adult, when I go back and watch them, I can enjoy the first season, and I can look at it and say, well, they didn't answer the questions, but hey, that's exactly what would have happened. It wasn't a plot hole. It was a mystery that was left unsolved. And then you get to the second season, it's just like, oh, this is so obvious. And so, and just no American program would ever have been made, even back then, that left those mysteries open. And we see that by how fast they put the kibosh on it and said, no, fix it up, answer the questions, do this stuff. So I think there is a cultural difference.
It's challenging too. I mean, to raise the questions, to pose the mystery, and then to refuse to solve it. Say, I'll leave it to you. It's that puts it on you as the viewer. You know, you've got to let your imagination fill in the gaps, which is wonderful, because then there is no disappointment that so often, I mean, Doctor Who is an example of particularly guilty of this, that some explanation is trotted out because there's this need to explain everything.
Is there a difference?
But is that terribly disappointing?
Is there a difference to you, whether or not we're talking about... So, okay, you and I are watching, both of us watched Sapphire and Steel long after the show was off the air. Is there a difference when you go to a TV series or to a movie or to the theater? If I go to the theater and the story left me with a mystery at the end, I would walk out the door knowing that I'm not going to get the answer. And that might be a different feeling in my mind than if they left mysteries opens in a TV series with me thinking, well, I'm going to get the answers, down the line. They probably will give me some answers down the line if they've crafted it properly. And then in a case of a TV series like Sapphire and Steel, which we're watching on DVD, and you know that story 6 is the end. And so as you watch through that episode, you go, am I going to get the answers? I'm going to get the answers. I'm going to get the answers. And you hit that wall at the end and you don't. Does that change the enjoyment of it? Does that change the expectation, or what you would allow the writer to do if you thought he was going to continue on? Or
I mean, it honestly doesn't for me. And I'm always surprised by the sense of entitlement that some TV show fans seem to have when a show goes without explaining something, and it'll finish, and that somehow that'll ruin everything that came before. I mean,
there is an argument that says, for example, that if you don't provide a certain amount of detail, if the resolution in some way requires... I'm not exactly sure how to explain what I'm getting at here, but as an example of the sense of entitlement that you mentioned. Well, this is kind of off the curb, but for example, if you've got somebody and they're in a movie and they're in the car and we've watched them throughout the whole story, and somebody jumps in the car, manhandles them, throws them in the back seat of the car, and they drive off. And the guy reaches over and pulls a gun out from underneath the bottom of the seat and shoots the guy who's kidnapped him. You will get audiences who feel cheated because you've not set that up. But on the other hand, directors of modern shows are so bad about doing that you can be guaranteed that if 2 hours down the line they need a gun to be underneath the seat of the car, they will put in a completely useless scene where you see the gun being put underneath the seat of the car so that the audience won't be outraged by this case. And the whole concept of the Dux a Machina, where we just pull something out at the last minute and kind of do it, irritates people. So I mean, there is a certain expectation that the writer will tell you something that explains what has been happening in the story.
Yes, I agree, and I guess I probably have more sympathy with the people who would complain that something has been ruined by too much explanation rather than too little. You know, if you have a resolution, but I think if you have a resolution that's too easy, you know, that you know, you pull a gun out of somewhere, like in your example, or whatever it is, that something suddenly turns up that resolves it.
See, I could expect, for example, if the character is, you know, has, I don't know, guns on the wall of their apartment, or is an ex-cop, or something of that nature, then for them to pull a gun out from underneath the seat, or to pull it out of the glove box, wouldn't bother me. But on the other hand, if they're a pacifist and vegetarian and, you know, wouldn't hurt anybody, and then they have a gun in their car, I'm not, you know, so I don't need the director to beat me over the head with it. But at the same time, it kind of has to be like, okay, you know, I can picture this guy having a gun in his car. So, you know, there's a line between being too subtle and being too blatant. And like I said, I like the mystery if the mystery doesn't mess up the plot, like in such a way that the only way the plot works is by not explaining the mystery. I have to believe that if we had understood it, things would have come out roughly the same if the audience had understood it. But
well, I think that's the key. What I understand the disappointment when there's a resolution that is too easy, it's too obvious, or rather, it's suddenly pulled from somewhere. It's not explained, and it's too convenient. And I think that's probably the key word rather than obvious. So you have some kind of convenient resolution to wrap things up at the end, and that can cheapen what's come before. What I think has happened, though, that is the difference. Because I mean, in a way, the question of whether or not you signal, you know, whether that gun is shown or not, or whether it's implied. I mean, for me, that's not a big deal. People get overexcited about this, as far as I'm concerned. You've got good writing and you've got bad writing, and that's what's important. But there is a sense that people need a resolution of some sort, and so maybe what we're talking about here is actually, we don't know what happens at the end. We Sapphire and Steel, the trap is sprung. We don't know how they escape it. We don't know we still don't know anything about them or who they are. As we've left, as far as it's implied, they will never escape. And
why they were put there is still a mystery too.
Well, not only do we not know any of this, neither does anyone else, including P.J. Hammond. So, for me, it misses the point that you don't necessarily need an explanation for everything. It's just there seems to be a desire to have that appetite for resolution satiated.
It's totally unlike real life, and this is. And this is why television has ruined your life. Somebody should make a TV show about that. Anyway, let's talk about the mysteries that we do have left on the table at the end of this story. We mentioned a little bit that these people are transient beings, or they think they're transient beings. And I guess the other probably big reveal that we get is when they first come to the idea of them being the agents of a higher authority. Steel says, "They asked me to work for them once, you know, and I turned them down." And then Sapphire is, "Oh, me too. Maybe that's why we work so well together." It's like, well,
the rebel instinct.
Yeah. So now, again, so we have the notion that maybe that's it. Maybe the transient beings seem to have less ability to travel through time than Sapphire and Steel. So if they had gone to work for this other authority, would they have been more powerful than the transient beings that we see? I don't know.
Well, I suppose in a way it's different. It's a different kind of power because it's a little bit like in Adventure 4 where Steel was complaining about the bosses, and it was like a kind of boss class. You know, I was thinking, well, you better go to the operatives union then, and you can down tools and have an operative strike. See what happens to time then, huh?
Yeah. It is odd that there's this. It's an us versus them mentality, and in fact, I think Sapphire says they're jealous of our success. So okay, they're successful at fixing time, at least 7 times, because we know about the one on the ship, and they're jealous of that. If time collapsing is such a bad thing, would you be jealous of that? Are they trying to fix these problems? I mean, we don't see any other operatives show up at the scenes of these cases, so again, it's just an odd dynamic. I would love to know what the heck is going on there, but obviously we never will.
No,
it's very unlikely that we ever will. And so the final piece is that neither Sapphire and Steel nor these creatures are immortal. And with Silver's help, because these transient beings can't travel through time, they have to have this device that is a time-traveling device that allows them to move through time. And with Silver's help, there are now 2 of them, one in possession of the bad guys, one in possession of the good guys. And Steel goes on the attack with it because it can be used as a weapon. And he dispatches most of them before they win. Bad guys win. Yet, the implication is that they can be killed, like I said, because at one point Silver says, well, if you send me back to the Triassic period of time, there'll be nothing there for me to live, I'll die. So, with this device, clearly they could have killed Sapphire and Steel from the very moment they arrived at the service station. But they don't. They leave them in a trap of nothingness forever. Which shows a kind of... Is that a vindictiveness? Is that meant to be a cruel punishment? Is that the only way you could really get rid of them? Do Sapphire and Steel represent job titles rather than people? And so if you trap them forever, there won't be another Sapphire and Steel? Questions. At the end, no answers. Sort of a bleak, sad ending. You're just staring out at nothingness forever.
It's rather a great ending. It's a shock,
and yet it's foreshadowed.
Yeah, and you wouldn't, if you were ending the series. It gives it a kind of resolution, and you wouldn't want it to end in some lesser way. It's very dramatic.
And obviously, time is never going to stop being a problem. So if you just ended the series, we know we'll need Sapphire and Steel again someday. Do you think that is there anything out of the documentary that gives the implication that P.J. Hammond was thinking maybe he could write, Jet and Radium, a new series?
In fact, the story isn't... Not only was it something which he had worked out an explanation for, but also it wasn't necessarily going to be the last story.
Oh, really?
There seemed to be differing accounts from the different people involved over why it finished. But the main one seems to be the fact that Lord Grade's ATV lost the franchise to Central TV. And this story actually ended up getting shunted out on Central TV, and there was some confusion over it. It got printed in TV Times that it was a repeat and so forth. But there were plans, at least at some point, for a seventh adventure. And, maybe David McCallum and Joanna Lumley were too busy, or they felt it had run its course. But he had ideas about it. One of the interesting things is that his resolution for it is that the way they escape is there's a cutlery drawer, and from the cutlery, Silver creates a way of getting them back into time, and from that you can guess that PJ Hammond's version of the ending of Adventure 6 involved Silver getting trapped as well, which maybe partly answers the question of what Silver was doing in this story plot-wise.
I was going to say, he certainly didn't. He didn't appear to be trapped at the end.
No, and that's another unanswered question. We don't know what happened to Silver, or exactly what his role was, but it was felt certainly by David McCallum that because there was uncertainty about the future of the show, and because it was Sapphire and Steel, that it should just be the two of them trapped at the end there, which to me seems absolutely right, certainly in retrospect.
Well, they do make some points throughout the course of the episodes, like, we're not interested in you, Silver. I only want them. You don't have to die now. It fits that they're not there, or that Silver's not there at the end, because he wasn't the intended victim, but he seems to be, they're more than willing to make him collateral damage along the way. Now, it's interesting, is there anything in the commentary there as to why this, of all episodes, appeared to end with a cliffhanger when none of the others did?
No, I wondered about that, and it seemed odd that to make this one the end of series cliffhanger, and none of the others had. If they weren't thinking, well, this is actually the end of the show, and I haven't found any answers about that. The documentary again isn't clear on it, so perhaps it's one of those things where even at the time they weren't sure of the future of the show, so they wrote it in such a way as it could go either way.
Well, it's definitely it's a shocking ending. It's an interesting series from the get-go. I thought it was immediately, like I said, I had heard about it. I knew something about the story, the whole series, but really, to me, there's a huge difference between seeing it and reading about it. And so I'm not bothered too much that I knew the ending was kind of bleak for Sapphire and Steel, but I did not expect the series to be what it was, even with the writing. And I think that's the craft of acting and television, that it leaps beyond just what you read on the page. You could read a script to a movie, and perhaps you can envision the final product, but it really is the movie itself that makes it what it is. So I was very happy with Sapphire and Steel. I'm not bothered by the cheap special effects, as we've discussed. That sort of thing rarely bothers me. Sometimes it bothers me when you can just tell that they just didn't bother to try. But by and large, I think it's a great example of what is a cult TV series, which probably should have has a little better longevity than it does. It's not. I don't think it's syndicated.
You mean in terms of its length? Well, it's never been repeated on terrestrial television over here.
I mean in terms of its legacy, not that it should have run longer. Maybe it should have. Like I say, they would have had to bring in different writers. I really think that PJ Hammond had kind of run out of ideas, and I'm not imaginative enough to come up with a way around that, but that doesn't mean other writers wouldn't. So I think you were right there, that they could have picked up some other writers and they could have gone further on.
I'd have been interested to see some more Sapphire and Steel stories. It left. I thought the show. I mean, I agree with you. I think it's a great show, and it does stand up now in many respects, and it left you wanting more, which is always a good thing, really. I mean, you could imagine it could have carried on to be entertaining, but that the way it finished with this story, it's a fantastic ending. It's really good.
So I think we can give a thumbs up to Sapphire and Steel as a series, as this episode as a whole. And yes, we've got Ben with us now. Ben, are you there?
Yes, I am. I've been listening into what you two have been talking about and finding it very interesting.
Great. Well, now that we've got you, let's just turn it over to you. What are your thoughts in general on this episode? And since we're at the end of the run, Sapphire and Steel in general.
Well, let me first start off on what I thought about this episode. I agree with what you guys have been saying. I thought this one became my favorite. I can't explain why. There was just something really about the setting. I thought the storytelling was really at its absolute best. It's like PJ, by the time he got to this story, he really had a good sense of dramatic telling. There were a couple of questions that I had. I know that you two have been talking about what the heck was Silver doing there. Now, obviously, he had been summoned to be there because he got the same. How did he put it? He just had this knowledge that he needed to be there, just like both Sapphire and Steel needed to. So what was his whole role supposed to be, even though he really wasn't the target? So, yeah, there was some little bit of question about that. I don't think that took away from the story too much because I like David Collins a great deal, and I love the character of Silver. He's a lot more fun and more playful than Steel himself. So it's kind of fun to watch some of the dynamic go on when he's there, especially the flirtatious way that he's with Sapphire. So I liked seeing him there. But of course, the big whammy is these agents that are there. And I heard you mention something about you guys are talking about were they indeed a higher authority, as Sapphire had claimed they were, being transient beings and all. I was doing some reading on Wikipedia about this, and from what that author said, the author of that column, he stated that yes, there was a higher authority which was behind it, but that the higher authority actually recruited the transient beings to be a part of this. The next question that I had is, well, what do the superiors to Sapphire and Steel have to say about this? There's very little talk about that. It kind of made me wonder if this wouldn't maybe put certain respective superiors at odds with each other. The people that are in charge of the team that Sapphire and Steel are a part of versus this higher authority. I mean, obviously the Sapphire and Steel superiors must be very pleased with what they do, which is why, as I think Sapphire points out, I mean, they're perfectly suited for each other in terms of personality. So they're always being paired together, and based on, I guess, their success rate, their superiors must be very, very pleased. So now you've got this other higher authority, as has been stated. They're doing something because they're jealous of the independence that Sapphire and Steel have. And I kind of get the feeling that we're talking about some higher orders of being here, which are now going to be some that we kind of get the feeling are supposed to be on the same side, essentially, and yet now they're going to be at odds with each other. I found that to be I thought there's some really interesting drama that could be, I mean, maybe not become major story elements, but something which I think could have an impact had the series been allowed to continue. And I don't know if this is, I doubt this is even addressed in the radio dramas, but had the series been allowed to continue on television, maybe there would have been some indirect effect by this kind of tension going on between these two divisions in the order of the universe. I mean, that's one of the things that, one of the big issues that really came to my mind. I don't know, what did you think about that, Eugene?
Unanswered questions. Just lots and lots of unanswered questions. Although now that you did phrase it the way you did, it does occur to me that the question, that the opening title actually provides us the answer to the higher authority, because it does say forces that control each dimension when it's talking about who assigns and who takes care of the problems. And so therefore, whoever is talking is above the forces that control each dimension.
Mm-hmm.
There's a force that controls all dimensions.
Right. Well, I always took that to be the boss, the one who's in charge. I mean, because that's the voice that we hear always say, Sapphire and Steel have been assigned. So I always got the feeling that was the authority that said, okay, you two, here's your case.
But now I'm thinking that because of the way it phrases that, then obviously there are more than one dimension, there are more than one authority that will handle it, there's more than one. So anyway. So what about the series as a whole?
The series as a whole, I really grew to love. It had... It obviously, it's essentially a science fiction show. I mean, you and I have discussed this in the past, but it has some interesting window dressing. Times it's a ghost story. At times it's a period piece. I mean, it kind of has a bit of a Dark Shadows feel to it at times, and it's something that I really very much enjoyed. It was a little bizarre. I like what Simon said at the beginning, and that is, it kind of made you say, "Huh? What is this?" The more we got to watch them, especially Sapphire and Steel, the more engaged I became with them. I heard your comment that you were just really, I mean, naturally you like Joanna Lumley as Sapphire. I mean, she's quite pretty, quite lovely to look at.
She sure is purty.
She's very pretty. But that you were really intrigued with David McCallum playing the part of Steel. I would agree with that, although I kind of get the feeling that no matter what part David McCallum plays, it's Steel. That seems to be him. I mean, it's almost like he was typecast for that part. I always enjoyed watching Joanna Lumley because my introduction to her, of course, is, I think maybe with a lot of people, is through Absolutely Fabulous. So always seeing her in that mode.
She was in Absolutely Fabulous?
In AbFab.
Huh. I don't watch the show.
Well, you hated the show. No wonder you didn't know. But she was just this complete dingbat. So to see her younger, about 25 to 30 years younger, in this kind of role was really, really pleasing to me. I always enjoyed watching her, but I just thought it was a really, really well told story. I kind of get the feeling that, and I think you both touched on this, that if PJ was sort of writing himself into a corner, he was beginning to run out of stories. I agree. It would have been. I would have liked to have seen the show carry on with other people writing, as we observed. Both you and I talked about Dr. McD Must Die, which has to be one of the most I don't know, whimsical is the appropriate term. But it definitely was a breath of fresh air having someone else put their take on it. It would have been nice to have seen other people do that and just add to the entire Sapphire and Steel mythos. It's a fantastic show. I really, really enjoyed it. I would have liked to have seen more, but I'm happy with what I got.
Well, I guess that we have nattered on probably enough for tonight's episode of Fusion Patrol. I hope you'll join us again next time. Simon, I appreciate you coming on the show.
It's been a pleasure as always.
And we'll have you back again. I know there's the terribly exciting grand finale for Man from Atlantis coming up that is your favorite. I'm going to remind everyone that we have our new online discussion forums at fusionpatrol.com, or you can look for us on Facebook, or you can find us on Twitter, Fusion Patrol. We'd love for you to chat with us, tell us what you think. So, I hope you'll join us all again next time on Fusion Patrol.
Cheers.
You've been listening to the Fusion Patrol Podcast, a production of Lone Locust Productions. Join us on our new discussion forums at fusionpatrol.com. Find us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter, username Fusion Patrol. You can also send us feedback by email at feedback@fusionpatrol.com. If you'd like to support Fusion Patrol, please leave us a review on iTunes. Fusion Patrol's theme music is Fight the Future by Amberwolf.